mean, he kind of got aggressive with me one time on the phone. So that's when I kind of was like.
Diddy was in the news for his decision to return publishing rights to Bad Boy artists. Did B5 benefit from that?
That's a discussion.
We didn't hear anything. We didn't get no calls or nothing like that from that. But
with a camera, yeah. Puff, Diddy,
we
yeah.
pull, yeah.
We want our publishing too.
What he did to 90s R&B group B5 is truly heartbreaking. But even that doesn't begin to cover it. They were 5 brothers, bonded by trauma, raised on harmony, and sold as the next Jackson 5 by Diddy himself.
I got a B5 hat. Yeah. They got the purple. Can y'all, for everybody since you're being introduced to the world, can y'all say everybody's name? You can start down here and work your way down.
But the truth is, they were chewed up by the industry, used for their childhoods, and left with nothing.
Bad Boy, I don't know who's, like, they just kept, like, kind of pushing, like, our project back a little further and further. For us, it was like, why is it taking so long? We're losing momentum.
And the worst part? It was someone they trusted. This is how fame nearly destroyed B5, and why no one stopped it. The story begins in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the Breeding family was about to change R&B history. 4 brothers, Dustin, Kelly, Patrick, and Brian, along with their cousin Carnell, formed what would become B5. But this wasn't just another group of kids playing at being stars. Carnell's inclusion in the family wasn't by choice, it was born from tragedy. After his biological mother became a fatal victim of domestic violence, he was raised alongside the Breeding brothers from a very young age. The 5 boys became inseparable, and their shared trauma only strengthened their bond. Their mother recognized something special in her sons. She saw the way they moved, the way they harmonized naturally, and she made a decision that would change everything. She encouraged them to pursue music professionally, pushing them to showcase their talents across Florida. The boys drew inspiration from legends, Michael Jackson's Moonwalk, New Edition's Harmonies, and the pop sensibilities of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys all influenced their developing sound. They weren't just copying, they were absorbing, learning, and creating something uniquely their own. Enter Radio Disney, the network that broadcast music specifically for children, preteens, and teenagers. For B5, it was the perfect platform. They entered a contest and didn't just win, they dominated. Every single event Radio Disney organized, B5 came out on top. Their talent was undeniable, their charisma infectious. The network took notice. Soon, B5 became the official Radio Disney dancers, performing at events and building a massive young fan base.
We're B5!
And you're getting the good stuff.
This is the sound file, Radio Disney.
But this was just the beginning. In 1998, operating under the name TNT Boys, the 4 oldest members caught the attention of management who saw bigger potential. They were taken to Atlanta, the heart of the R&B industry, to audition for record labels. That's where they met Kevin Wales, CEO of Worldwide Entertainment. Wales saw something the boys hadn't considered. Their youngest brother Brian, only 10 years old, had the same spark as his older siblings. Initially, the brothers were hesitant. Brian was so young, so innocent. Could he handle the pressure of the music industry? But Wales was persistent, and eventually, the family agreed to give it a try. The moment Brian joined, everything clicked. The group's dynamic shifted, their sound evolved, and their name changed to reflect their new reality. B5, representing all 5 Breeding family members. Little did they know, this decision to include Brian would later become one of their biggest sources of guilt and regret. Kevin Wales had connections, and in 2001, he introduced the boys to the man who would sign them to their first record deal. The man who would promise them the world and deliver heartbreak instead. The boys were about to meet Sean "Diddy" Combs, CEO of Bad Boy Records, and their lives would never be the same. When Sean "Diddy" Combs first laid eyes on B5, he saw dollar signs. The year was 2001, and Bad Boy Records was at the height of its power. Diddy had already made stars out of artists like the Notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, and 112. Now he was promising to do the same for 5 young boys from Florida. The signing felt like a dream come true. Here was one of the most powerful men in hip-hop and R&B, telling them they were special, that they had what it took to be the next big thing. For teenagers who had been grinding in small venues across Florida, this was validation beyond their wildest dreams. Diddy didn't just sign them, he made them part of the Bad Boy family. The boys moved to New York, immersing themselves in the culture of one of music's most successful labels. They worked with top-tier producers, learned from industry veterans, and prepared for what was supposed to be their triumphant debut. The recording process for their self-titled debut album was intensive. Diddy brought in heavy hitters, producers like Rodney Jerkins, who had worked with Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, and Ryan Leslie, known for his innovative production style. This wasn't some rushed, low-budget project. Bad Boy was investing serious money and talent into B5. The boys threw themselves into the work: long studio sessions, vocal coaching, choreography rehearsals. They did everything asked of them, and more. They believed they were building something special, something that would last. When their debut album was finally released in July 2005, it seemed like all their hard work had paid off. The album entered the Billboard 200 at number 19, an impressive debut for any new artist, let alone a teenage boy band. Their first single, a cover of the Jackson 5's All I Do Is Think of You, showcased their vocal abilities and paid homage to their heroes. But it was their follow-up single, You Got Me, that really proved their star power. The song climbed the charts, and suddenly, B5 was everywhere, on radio, on television, in magazines. They were living the dream. The hysteria reached its peak during a November 2005 performance at Brookdale Center Mall in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for the Radio Disney Jingle Jam Tour. What was supposed to be a routine mall performance turned into chaos. Fans rushed the stage with such force that a riot ensued. People were injured. The boys themselves were stripped of their clothes and jewelry by overzealous fans. It should have been a warning sign, not of their popularity, but of how unprepared everyone was for the intensity of their success. These were still children, and the machinery around them wasn't equipped to protect them from the darker side of fame. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't as golden as they appeared.
It wasn't until like our second album, Diddy actually came to BET 106 in Park and actually saw firsthand. That photo right there was the day. He saw firsthand the reaction and our connection to our fans. So it's like if you would have been more involved in that sense, it could have projected us in a different direction.
While B5 was performing to screaming crowds and seeing their faces on magazine covers, they weren't seeing the financial rewards they had been promised. The machine was working, but who was it really working for? Success in the music industry can be deceiving. From the outside, B5 looked like they had everything: hit songs, screaming fans, magazine covers, and the backing of one of the most powerful labels in music. But behind the glamorous facade, cracks were beginning to show.
Bad Boy, I don't know who's, they just kept, kind of pushing, our project back a little further and further.
Their second album, Don't Talk Just Listen, released in 2007, should have been their victory lap. The lead single, Hydraulics, featured Bow Wow, one of the hottest rappers of the moment.
Bad Boy, busy on the one. I came to party just to show you how it's done.
On paper, everything looked perfect. In reality, it was the beginning of the end of their relationship with Bad Boy Records. The album suffered from a lack of promotion, while their debut had received the full Bad Boy treatment: music videos, radio promotion, television appearances. Their sophomore effort felt like an afterthought. The boys watched helplessly as their carefully crafted songs disappeared into the void of industry indifference. In My Bedroom, their follow-up single, barely made a dent in the charts. The boys who had once caused riots at mall performances were now struggling to get their music heard. They began to question what was happening behind the scenes. Industry insiders knew what B5 was slowly learning. The music business is brutal, especially for young artists. Record labels invest in acts, but if the first album doesn't meet expectations, subsequent releases often receive minimal support. B5 was experiencing this harsh reality firsthand. The lack of promotion wasn't just disappointing, it was devastating. These young men had poured their hearts into their music, working with top producers and believing they were creating something special. To see their work dismissed felt like a betrayal of everything they had been promised.
Of them, but for us, it was like, why is it taking so long? We're losing momentum.
Frustration mounted within the group. They were talented. They had proven their ability to connect with audiences, but they felt trapped in a system that no longer believed in them. The boys who had once been Bad Boy's golden children were now feeling like forgotten stepchildren. In an attempt to regain control of their destiny, B5 made a drastic decision. They would rebrand themselves completely. They changed their name to Audio, hoping a fresh identity would give them a fresh start. It was a desperate move by young men who were running out of options. The name change didn't work. Audio failed to gain traction, and the boys found themselves in an even worse position than before. They had lost the recognition that came with the B5 brand without gaining any new momentum. Faced with mounting frustration and dwindling opportunities, the group made another difficult decision. They would take a break. For the first time since they were children, the brothers would step away from music to grow as individuals and live life.
So we actually split from Bad Boy, and we took time off to kind of reinvent ourselves.
It was a painful admission that their childhood dream had become a nightmare. These young men, who had sacrificed their adolescence for music, were finally acknowledging that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. But the break wouldn't last long. The music was still in their blood, and they weren't ready to give up on their dreams entirely. After years of disappointment and broken promises, hope arrived in an unexpected form. On April 26, 2013, B5 shocked their fans with an announcement that seemed too good to be true. They were back. They had a new single called Say Yes, and they had signed with the legendary MOTOWN Records. MOTOWN, the label that had created legends like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, and yes, the Jackson 5. For B5, this felt like destiny. They were returning to their roots, signing with the label that had inspired their entire careers. The boys were older now, more experienced, and theoretically wiser about the music industry. They had learned painful lessons during their time with Bad Boy, and they were determined not to repeat the same mistakes. Say Yes was everything fans had hoped for and more.
Girl, and I want you to say yeah, and I'm gonna say yeah, and I want you to say yeah.
The song showcased a more mature B5, with sophisticated harmonies and production that reflected their growth as artists. The music video received its first televised showing on BET's 106 & Park, a prestigious platform that proved they were still relevant in the R&B world. Critics praised the comeback single, and fans responded with enthusiasm. After years of uncertainty, it seemed like B5 was finally getting the respect and support they deserved. MOTOWN promised them a new album, proper promotion, and a chance to reclaim their position in the music industry. For months, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The boys worked on new material, excited about the possibility of finally releasing an album that would receive the full backing of their label. They felt like they were building something special, not just music, but a legacy. But history has a cruel way of repeating itself. Just as things seemed to be falling into place, familiar problems began to resurface. Internal conflicts with management started to create tension within the group. promises made by the label began to feel hollow. The album they had been working on, the one that was supposed to mark their triumphant return, was suddenly in jeopardy. The situation reached a breaking point when their highly anticipated album was shelved indefinitely. Years of work, hopes, and dreams were once again being held hostage by industry politics and broken promises. Carnell, perhaps the most outspoken member of the group, couldn't contain his frustration any longer. In a since-deleted Instagram post, he unleashed his anger and disappointment, calling out MOTOWN directly. His words were raw and unfiltered, the pain of yet another betrayal evident in every sentence. He wrote about the BS they continued to endure, the lies and false hopes that had become a constant in their careers. Most heartbreakingly, he acknowledged that their own management team was part of the problem, preventing them from moving forward even without label support. The post ended with a desperate plea to fans to protest outside MOTOWN's Manhattan headquarters, a cry for help from young men who felt completely powerless in an industry that had repeatedly failed them. Once again, B5 found themselves starting over, their dreams deferred by the very system that was supposed to help them achieve success. By 2015, the members of B5 had reached a painful conclusion. If they wanted to succeed in music, they would have to do it on their own. The industry had failed them repeatedly, and it was time to take control of their own destinies. Dustin, the oldest brother and often the unofficial leader of the group, was the first to make the leap. In a December 2015 interview with Rated R&B, he shared the hard-earned wisdom that came from their experiences with both Bad Boy and MOTOWN. His advice was simple but profound. You've got to be careful who you trust. Be careful of who you have in your circle. Be willing to learn from other people. Keep good people around you and keep your circles small. Most importantly, he emphasized that artists should take that role on more themselves versus putting all their trust into a manager. These weren't just words. They were lessons learned through years of heartbreak and disappointment. Dustin had watched his childhood dreams get crushed by people he trusted, and he was determined not to let it happen again. At the end of 2015, Dustin released his first solo single, Pay It Forward, from his EP titled Different. True to his newfound philosophy, he chose to go completely independent, creating his own entertainment company rather than signing with another label. Patrick followed his older brother's lead shortly after. In late 2016, he dropped his first solo track, Here We Are, in anticipation of his EP titled New Breed. For 2 years, fans heard nothing more about the project until Patrick posted a snippet of another song called Before I Let Go on his personal Instagram. The track included a sample from the classic R&B song of the same name by Maze, showing that Patrick was honoring the musical traditions that had inspired B5 from the beginning. Kelly, now going by the shortened Kel, also ventured into solo territory. His debut track, Don't Know How to Dance, was part of his EP, The Artist, which was released to iTunes in October 2016. Like his brothers, Kelly was learning to navigate the music industry on his own terms. The solo ventures represented more than just individual artistic expression. They were acts of defiance against a system that had repeatedly let them down. Each brother was proving that their talent wasn't dependent on label support or industry validation. But perhaps the most important lesson they learned was about the value of ownership. After years of creating music that enriched others while leaving them empty-handed, the brothers were finally understanding the importance of maintaining control over their work. The independent route wasn't easy. Without major label backing, promotion was limited, and reaching large audiences was challenging. But for the first time in their careers, the brothers were making music on their own terms, keeping the profits from their work and building sustainable careers. Their solo journeys were teaching them something that no record executive had ever bothered to explain. True success in music isn't just about hit songs and screaming fans. It's about creating a sustainable career that you actually control. Music has a way of calling you back, no matter how much pain it has caused. In 2018, after 5 years of pursuing solo careers and learning to heal from their industry wounds, the brothers felt the pull of their shared history. B5 was reuniting. Their comeback single, Do That, dropped with little fanfare, but significant meaning. This wasn't just a song, it was a statement that they were ready to try again. This time with the wisdom that comes from experience and the scars that come from betrayal.
Say love, do not get caught up in my feelings. I admit it, when I'm with you, I get great love.
In May 2019, the group announced their new EP, New Jacksons, a title that spoke directly to their lifelong inspiration from the Jackson 5. The album was supposed to be released that summer, accompanied by their second reunion single, Wave. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The timing couldn't have been better. B5 had made a surprise appearance on B2K's Millennium Tour, and the audience reception was incredible. Fans who had grown up with their music were now adults, and their appreciation for B5's talent had only deepened with time. Ironically, the Millennium Tour had actually been B5's idea. They had pitched the concept to B2K, encouraging them to reach out to other artists to create a multi-act nostalgia tour. It was a brilliant concept that could have revitalized multiple careers simultaneously. But in a pattern that had become painfully familiar, B5 watched from the sidelines as their idea became reality without them. The tour they had conceived was announced with a full lineup of R&B acts, and B5 wasn't included. Fortunately, Pretty Ricky, another group on the tour, reached out to B5 when the tour was scheduled to hit Atlanta. They invited B5 to join that leg of the tour, giving them a chance to perform in their hometown. The performance was everything they had hoped for. A triumphant return that reminded everyone why B5 had been special in the first place. However, success in the music industry is never guaranteed, even when everything seems perfect. As summer came and went, B5 had to make another disappointing announcement to their fans. Due to a new distribution deal they were negotiating, New Jacksons would need to be pushed back indefinitely. The pattern was repeating itself once again. Promises made, expectations raised, and then disappointment delivered. As of today, New Jacksons still has not been released, leaving fans wondering if they will ever hear the album that was supposed to mark B5's definitive comeback. The situation became even more frustrating when B5 was announced as part of another reunion tour in August 2019, alongside Ray J, Jay Holiday, Day 26, and Immature. The TB reunion tour was supposed to be their chance to capitalize on the momentum from the Millennium Tour appearance. But once again, reality fell short of promises. Before the tour even began, problems emerged. Ray J, citing his need to be with his pregnant wife, dropped out of several shows. Other dates were canceled entirely, with many speculating that low ticket sales were to blame. The tour became a symbol of everything wrong with B5's career. Great ideas poorly executed, leaving them disappointed once again. On July 19, 2020, 15 years after the release of B5's debut album, Brian Breeding made a post that would expose the heartbreaking reality of their situation. In a since-deleted Instagram post, he revealed the financial truth that had been hidden for over a decade. "We made about 99.9% of all our income from live performances and merchandise," Brian wrote. "Until this day, I've never seen a penny from any of our B5 commercial albums." Let that sink in. Despite selling hundreds of thousands of albums, despite having hit songs that played on radio stations across the country, despite creating music that touched millions of lives, the members of B5 had never received a single royalty check from their recorded music. For years, Brian revealed, they had reached out to lawyers, advisors, and even TV networks, hoping someone would help them tell their story or fight for what they were owed. But no one would touch their case with a 10-foot pole. The post wasn't written from a place of self-pity, Brian clarified. It was a warning, an example for the next generation of young artists to write and own your content. He was using his pain to educate others, hoping they could avoid the same fate. B5 wasn't alone in their struggle with Bad Boy Records. Other artists like rapper Mace and R&B group 112 had also spoken publicly about not being fully compensated for their work. It seemed to be a pattern. Young, talented artists signing contracts they didn't understand, only to discover years later that they had signed away their rights and their future. Patrick also joined the conversation, revealing another painful detail. He called out Disney for never paying Kelly for a rap he had written for Get Your Head in the Game from the High School Musical soundtrack. Even their early success with Disney had apparently come without proper compensation. This revelation was particularly painful given how diplomatic the group had been just 1 year earlier. When promoting their planned comeback album in 2018, they had only positive things to say about Diddy and their time at Bad Boy. The contrast between their public statements and their private reality highlighted how trapped they had felt, unable to speak their truth without potentially damaging their careers further. Today, the members of B5 have moved on with their lives. Dustin, Carnell, and Brian are all fathers now. Carnell and Brian have gotten married. They've found happiness and success outside of the music industry that betrayed them. But the music industry has lost something precious in the process. B5 represented talent, dedication, and the dreams of young black men who wanted to share their gifts with the world. Instead of nurturing that talent, the industry exploited it, leaving these young men financially and emotionally scarred. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.